طيب. Sorry, we had a few technical issues there. I think we have managed to get connection to the internet now, so hopefully that's resolved that. طيب. بسم الله. الحمد لله. الحمد لله رب العالمين. له النعمة وله الفضل وله الثناء الحسن، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين الطاهرين. I ask Allah the Exalted to grant us all the sincerest of intentions, the ability to understand and to do good, and the reward in the hereafter. Is the slide clear? It's showing. طيب. So last week we started talking about some specific, if you like, cases or scenarios. This week I'm going to look at this issue known as OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, because for many people this illness, it is triggered by things to do with the Qareen. I'm sure, as will become apparent as we go through this particular lesson, inshallah. So there is a condition in Western medicine known as OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. This is a mental health condition where a person, they have obsessive thoughts or urges. We'll explain what each of these things mean. Obsessive thoughts or urges and compulsive behaviors that usually start with Was-Wās or Khawatir, and which develop into a disorder. It is something that can actually affect men, women, and children. And some people start having symptoms early, often around puberty. But it usually starts during the late teens and early 20s. But it can start any younger than this or even older than this. Muslims are affected by it, as are non-Muslims. And it is something that can be very distressing and significantly interfere with a person's life. That's when it becomes a disorder, like an illness. And for some people, it can be very, very severe, very extreme. But by the grace and mercy of Allah, with appropriate treatment, things can be done to keep it under control. The three main symptoms that you would find with it, and again, the scholars, they talked about the issues here. The scholars, they talked about the issues here that people experience and suffer with. And also in Western medicine, they talked about them in a way that some of us might be surprised. A non-Muslim by the name of Aubrey Lewis, he was said to be the first professor of psychiatry at the Institute of Psychiatry in London in the 1930s. He wrote a famous article describing the characteristics of this disorder. And he mentioned that the troublesome thoughts, the thoughts that harm and bother a person, they are of three main, if you like, categories or areas. One is an idea or thought of harm to yourself or others, ideas of lust and uncleanliness, and blasphemous thoughts, kufr thoughts, what we refer to as kufr thoughts. So these issues are well established, if you like, in Western literature, Western medical literature, that people in particular, they suffer with bothersome thoughts about harming yourself or harming others, thoughts around lust, that is sexual matters, uncleanliness, which is what we would typically refer to as najasa, and blasphemous thoughts. So the three main symptoms of it are that a person might get frequent and irregular, repetitive, obsessive thoughts, unpleasant emotions, and then compulsive behaviors. So these are the three things that you'll find again and again happening with it. Obsessive thoughts, unpleasant emotions, that is fear and anxiety in particular, and then compulsive, as though you're forced to do something to try to relieve yourself from that unpleasant emotion that you are experiencing. So to explain that a bit more, an obsession is an unwanted, intrusive, bothersome, interfering, unpleasant thought. And it might be an image, and it might be an urge to do something. Like this feeling inside yourself that as though you need to do something. But it's something that you don't enjoy. Right? It causes a person a certain amount of distress. That bad thought that they had, that image that came to them, that urge that they are feeling, it bothers them. So this is the thing about the unpleasant emotion. So the obsession causes a feeling usually of intense anxiety, distress, disgust, like hatred of something, disgust, and or unease, not feeling relaxed. This then leads on to the third thing, which is the compulsion. The compulsion is a repetitive behavior or mental act that a person feels they need to do to relieve themselves, ultimately in a temporary way, but to relieve themselves of the unpleasant emotion brought on by that bothersome thought, that obsessive thought. And then the cycle continues like that. The person has this certain thought that they do not like. It's not in their control. So it might be a khatir that suddenly comes to them, like a sudden spontaneous thought, and it might result from a waswasa, from was-Wās. Once it occurs, the person feels any one of these things. And either this is not something that I want, not something that I can control, I want it to go away, but it's bothering me, it's intrusive, it's unpleasant, it leads to anxiety, distress, depending on the thing, disgust. How can I have such an awful thought, such an awful feeling or urge? And that bothers them even more. Usually that leads to increased levels of anxiety and unease. But then to resolve it, people, rather than following the religious teachings, most of them are not even aware of the concept of Was-Wās, or the fact that they have a Qareen that is with them. And they're not aware of the issues of khawatir or the khatir, that sudden thought that might come to you uncontrollably. It's not in your control, about which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explicitly said, you are not accountable for it. Allah does not hold you to account for those thoughts that come to your mind without your control. Likewise, you are not accountable for the was-wās that comes from shaitan. This life, it is a test. Okay, it is a test. How do people deal with distressing, if you like, situations? How do we deal with temptations? How do we deal with our enemy, shaitan? Shaitan is our biggest and greatest enemy. In the past, he managed to harm people who are much greater than us in status. Okay, people who are much greater than us in status. Ultimately, a person needs to learn from their mistakes and not to repeat them, and refer back to the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to try to avoid yourself making the mistake in the first place. The Qareen, he enjoys causing pain and distress to human beings in general, but in particular to the Muslims, because they have what he hates, massively hates, and that's our iman. And he typically will not, like a thief, go to an empty house. He targets more the ones who learn or try to learn or try to turn towards the religion if they've learned the correct belief, because then they have the most precious thing that a human being can acquire, and that's the correct iman. So, as I said, like a thief that does not go to an empty house, shaitan doesn't bother sometimes the non-believers in the same way that he might seek to harm the believers. Thereafter, when a person is not dealing with these issues in the right way, they will usually become more stressed and more panicked out. When one is in that state and situation, the shaitan, the Qareen, he takes advantage of that, takes advantage of our stress and our panicking, our lack of knowledge, or lack of implementation of the knowledge that we have. Some people would learn and you teach them certain principles, but for one reason or another, they don't implement them. Some of them because they've developed like a mental disorder, which I'll say a bit more about. That has its own challenges. Subhanallah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us very simply, precisely, and concisely, whenever you get such a bothersome thought, image, and the like, that you say the isti'adha. You say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Yani, I seek the protection of Allah. A'udhu billah minash shaitanir rajim. Shaitan, the one that is damned and who has a low status, a lowly status. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then said, Waliyantah, and stop at that. Stop. One word, just stop. Don't continue dwelling upon it, thinking more about it. Shaitan might say to you, how could you have such a bad thought? Just to try to get you to get panicked again. Because the more panicked you are, the more effective his was-wās would be. So to say a bit more about this issue, almost everyone, right? Almost everyone has unpleasant or unwanted thoughts at some point, in their life, in their day or in their week. It happens. Sometimes it might be Suddenly you think, did I lock the door of the house or not? Okay, so this is a thought that comes to your mind and it bothers you, it distresses you. We mentioned in last week's lesson, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari that whatever bothersome thought, distressing thought that comes to a person, whatever leads them to be feeling sad or distressed or down or fearful, even the pricking of a thorn that you are patient with, Allah would make it a means for your forgiveness. Okay? So you need to be patient. But let's say you get that thought, did I lock the door or not? Now, guess what? You might not have locked the door. This is not just a bothersome thought that, I didn't lock the door. Probably, let's say in this case, you didn't lock the door. So that's distressing for you. You forgot to do something. Okay? So some of the unpleasant thoughts that we might get, they might be in relation to something real. That's not OCD. That's not obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay? But sometimes these, if you like, normal occurrences that happen with human beings, if we do not deal with them in the right way, disorders can develop, problems can occur. Something happens that makes you upset. It's real. Your father dies. Okay? Your house gets robbed. Your child does something really bad. Whatever it might be. Real things that occur that stress people out. They might lead to you not sleeping properly, not eating properly, which sometimes then can lead to even, as I said, some mental disorders developing. So, yeah, a person might get a thought like that. And it might be a sudden, unpleasant thought or something kufr, something wrong about Allah or His prophets or the angels or the religion of Islam, or some other violent image suddenly that comes to your mind. Something that causes you some distress. If a person does not understand what is happening with them and deal with the reality in the way that you should deal with it, this is life. So people will get bothersome thoughts. This is life. Happens with human beings. Even with some pious people, they get thoughts that bother them. It's not just about people who are sinful. But if you don't know, as I said, how to deal with these unpleasant thoughts, then shaitan will take advantage of that. Okay? They can become persistent because shaitan takes advantage of that. To the extent that for some people, they then start to dominate, take over, like the person's thinking, regularly on their mind. To the extent that they might end up interrupting other thoughts and overwhelm one. And this is when it becomes an obsession. This is when the person starts to develop like a disorder. Here, again, there are several religious issues that you need to bear in mind. You need to regularly remind yourself that whatever Allah eternally willed to be shall be. Everything that is occurring and that will occur, it occurs in compliance with the eternal knowledge of Allah. in compliance with the eternal will of Allah, in compliance with the eternal taqdeer, the destining of it by Allah the Exalted, and ultimately then by Allah creating it. Okay? By Allah, even if it is an evil, disgusting thought about Allah the Exalted. Allah created good and bad. Allah created shaitan. Allah created the pig. Allah created different types of creatures, some with a low status and some with a high status. Allah created the angels and the prophets. From one point of view, creating good or bad, good or evil, this is just bringing a matter into existence. That is, rather than it not existing, it exists. Allah creates whatever He eternally willed. For our wisdom, whether we know it or not, one of the most apparent things here, wisdom, is that when people face certain hardships and difficulties, and during that they are patient, this gives them reward. It relieves them of some of their sins by way of forgiveness, and importantly, and for the ones whose heart is pure, it can make a person more submitting to Allah. Why? Because it reminds you how weak you are, how vulnerable you are. From one point of view, how lacking in control we are, and that everything is ultimately under the power and control of Allah the Exalted, the one who is free of need, and the one that we are all in need of. It also helps a person desire paradise even more, because in paradise there aren't any of these distresses. There is no sadness, there's no worry, there's none of these unpleasant thoughts. In paradise you don't suffer. There is no shaitan to bother you, to give you was-Wās, to affect you in a negative way. Among other such considerations. So you need to regularly remind yourself that whatever Allah eternally will to be shall be. Some common obsessive thoughts, images, urges that are documented in Western medical literature, but also people who have either personal experience, knowledge and experience of this issue, or because others might have asked you religious questions pertaining to them. There's 4 or 5 that people often suffer from. A person, they might have this thought, right? One of them is that, what if I get contaminated by a particular disease, infection, or an unpleasant substance? If I get COVID, what will happen? Okay? That's been a massive one of late. Shaitans had a field day. And unfortunately, the next year or two, Allah knows best how many people are going to suffer even more. In particular, those who did not learn the correct belief and implement it. As I'm going to come on to in the conclusion of this lesson to emphasize even more about. Subhanallah. And COVID, anxiety, and so on, it's very real. Very, very real. Anyway, but it's not something new. That's also true. It's not something new. People for many, many years they've obsessed, like worried excessively in an unhealthy way about becoming ill, getting an infection, dying, or becoming contaminated with something, with najasa, with something that's impure, okay, or something that's going to be unclean, that's going to lead you to get some sort of an illness. And it might start with something very real, something very normal that happens to human beings. They get ill one day, right? They might catch a cold, a virus from somebody. They might get an infection. And Allah, the one who created the infection in the first person, might create it in the second person and make a certain means of transmission between one person and another. As a result of which, you might get ill, and shaitan might then play upon that by getting you to stress about it more than one ought to. Rather than saying whatever Allah eternally willed to be and being patient, a person might start to dwell on this a lot and think the way around it is just to wash your hands again and again, or anywhere masks and keep certain distances and so on else, which nowadays are actively being encouraged. And it can go to extremes then, is the point. I'm not saying that that's something necessarily harmful to wear a mask or to wash your hands or keep a certain social distance. No. I mean, our Master Umar radiallahu anh mentioned, in light of what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught, that if there is the plague in a particular area, which is a type of illness, that don't go into it, don't go into that area. And if you're in that area already, don't travel out of it. So this is not something new to us. Anyway, that's one of the types of unpleasant thoughts. Another one is that you might harm yourself or others by mistake. For example, the fear that you might set the house on fire by leaving the cooker on. Again, this might happen because, or it might be on the back of, you might have actually done this, accidentally left the gas on. Shaitan then says to you later on, what if you didn't manage to turn it off? What if you didn't realize? What if the house exploded? What if you died? What if your child died? What if your parents died? What if? And the person starts to dwell upon it. And a bit later, shaitan reminds them again and reminds them again until they start to get fearful about it. Then shaitan tells them, whilst they're in bed, go and check. Maybe you left it on again. No, I'm sure. What if? Shaitan goes again, go check. No, I did check this time round, the person says. The shaitan says, the Qareen says, what if? What if? Till the person, their heart starts to go. So they go down and check. Okay? So this is the type of obsession that certain bothersome, unpleasant thought that leads to that unpleasant emotion. It occurs with them in a way that they go and check. They come downstairs and they check, yep, all of them are off. So then they go back. Shaitan says, what if you didn't really check properly? What if whilst you were checking that they were off, accidentally you turned it back on? You turned it on whilst you were turning it off, right? Or making sure that it's off. No. The person says, no, I'm sure I turned it off. Qareen says, what if? What if whilst you were making sure you were turning it off, accidentally when you were leaving, you hand flicked it, you didn't realize, maybe it's on. Where's the harm in just going back and checking again? Shaitan goes on and on like that. Go back and check. Go back and check. What if? What if? And again, the person starts to feel, see, this unpleasant emotion, that fear, that anxiety, that unease. So they go and check again. So this is the behavior. The obsession, then you have that in-between phase of the unpleasant emotion, and then there's the action, the behavior, the compulsion. It's like you're feeling yourself compelled to go and triple check. And Shaitan then says, what if you didn't check? Like in a way, then sometimes when you're looking at it, you think this guy is going crazy. But it builds up, it becomes a pattern. The fear is they find it hard to relax themselves out of it. The only way Shaitan stops giving them the was-wās is when they do what he wants them to do, which at the least is to waste their time, at least to waste their time, and sometimes to cause other types of harms. Sometimes it might be Shaitan says you might suddenly lose control, or not by mistake, but actively end up hitting someone or hitting your child. And again, anything that's going to cause you to feel not relaxed, uneasy, and fearful and anxious. Another one might be unease if there isn't a certain symmetry or orderliness, and a certain order to things. For example, you may feel the need to ensure all the labels on the tins in your cupboard are facing a certain way. These types of things might start in childhood. Shaitan just makes, that doesn't look quite right. You want it to have certain symmetry, things to be a certain way. You're walking along a pavement, Shaitan says like, don't walk on the lines. Or in a corridor, don't walk on the lines. Or you see something, I said like, on a shelf, things to be in a certain arrangement. So you just do it. Then Shaitan, each time you see it, Shaitan says, look, no, it'd be nice. It looks nicer like that. Do it. And then from there, sometimes things start to progress. Things that are without actually any benefit. That's the lighter one, actually. But it can, for some people, end up in a mess in terms of how it can take over their lives. Another common one is that they get a was-wāsa, a whisper from Shaitan that they might be sexually perverted. For example, a person gets repulsive sexual thoughts that they fear they might enact out, that they might actually do. Okay? That might be something that is haram and which legally in this country is considered unlawful. And it might be just something that is haram, but this country permits. Now, if it is something you can imagine that if the culture doesn't allow it, then there is that disgust, that unease, that risk of being found out, and the embarrassment that would go along with that. Now, Allah created the human beings with different manners and personalities. I mean, just to illustrate this issue, there are some types of food that if you eat or drink it, you go like that. You find it hard to palate. Some people, they love it. They say, don't you like that? It's really nice. And you might find it really bitter or really too sweet or the like. But some people might really enjoy it. Some of it can be cultural. Some of it other than that. And it just people, it's not just their environment, what they got used to eating, just the way some people incline. Some young children love to eat spicy food. You wouldn't imagine it to be like that. People are different. People are different. And people might have different inclinations in them, even sexual ones. They might find some strange things attractive. They might have strange fantasies and fetishes. And he like sexual desires towards certain things, fetishes. Some of those, they might be haram. Some of them might be halal. Shaitan will play on that issue. Like, for example, one person who approached me saying, I need your help. And he said to me, I think I'm gay. I think I'm gay. So my initial response to that is, if that is the case, you need to control your desires. The norm is that men find women attractive and women find men attractive. That's the norm. There is a type of attraction that Allah created within human beings in the norm. But perhaps there are some people who find children attractive. Perhaps there are some people who find members of the same sex attractive. Maybe there are some who find animals attractive. Regardless of what the situation is, you need to control your desires. Whether you are in that normal category of people or those that would be religiously considered abnormal, or even culturally, according to the culture of this country and the legal, if you like, framework of this country, considered abnormal and illegal. That is, to engage in sexual activity with children or animals, for example. You need to control your desires. This is how it goes. So I said to him that I am not like that, but guess what? I cannot go and grab any woman that I find attractive. I need to control my desires. If I did, I would be committing a sin. The zina of the hands is the unlawful touch. The zina of the tongue are the unlawful words. The zina of the eyes is the unlawful look. Ultimately, until a person might commit the actual act of zina, which is an enormous sin, deserving of punishment in hellfire. So, each of us needs to control their desires. Anyway, in conversation, he said to me, it started when I was 15 years old. I was at the gym. He said this guy was training and he took his top off or exposed part of his body. And I looked at him and I said, oh, he's got a nice body. As many guys, I don't go to the gym, but anyway, as many guys seem to, and as it's been reported to me, think. Okay? But it's not a sexual issue. But he was 15 years old. He didn't even know that there is such a thing called Qareen. What is Was-Wās? What is the Khatir? Even what is or anything. Anyway, this thought came to him. He's got a nice body. Then it was followed up by, you just checked him out. He said, no. You just checked him out. I think you fancy him. I think you like him. And it started going like that. And he was like, no, what's happening to me? Like, this can't be. And you see, also, when you're at that age of puberty, okay, and these issues that have been talked about, there are hormonal changes happening inside you, okay? You're feeling certain desires and urges that you never felt before. There's not a lot of knowledge. You lack in maturity. Nobody's taught you about the sins of the private parts, okay? You've not learned so many of these other rules, even about belief. Believing in Allah and everything is by His will and you to be patient. All of these things that people are lacking in. And the person's 14, 15 years old, living in this era. So the person, he started to get stressed and he kept going at him. Maybe you did. Maybe you did. Maybe you looked at him. Maybe you're just denying it. Maybe this is what you are. And it kept going on and on and on until he started to sort of believe in it. Because then sometimes, you might look at a man and you might say, actually, as a man, actually, this man's handsome. That's the same as saying you're finding that man sexually attractive. Yeah, a man might say that this is a handsome man. A woman might say about another woman, that's a beautiful woman. And shaitan again might play upon that. And it might even be that some men might look very feminine-like, if you like. And the person, they might catch a person's attention. Then you realize, okay, this is a man. And then you say, no. But then shaitan might again play upon that. Actually, there you go. There you go. You actually like men. Or for a woman, you like women. And he goes on and on like that. Sometimes making a problem from no problem, and it might be, I do not know. Maybe some people have these inclinations. Right? I don't know. Then shaitan plays on that and makes it go wherever he takes it. And some of them then unfortunately carry out haram acts, either with animals or children or others that are not lawful to them. A key thing here is to remind yourself that you need to not just fear being embarrassed, fear being abnormal. Fear that you need to have is a fear of Allah alone, coupled with a reliance upon Allah, being certain of His power, will, and knowledge. This helps a person fight one's fears and anxieties. As for shaitan, he will take advantage of your vulnerability, your lack of knowledge, or its implementation. He'll play on your anxieties and use, what is it, the question, the what if scenario. He'll play with you with that. What if whatever Allah eternally will to be shall be? That's how it is. What Allah eternally will to be shall be. What Allah did not eternally will to be shall not be. That's how it is. As for if shaitan's bothering you, you're not able to smack him physically. So it might be said you hit him with the isti'adha. Because that harms him and pushes him away. And stop at that. Don't dwell upon it. He will play with you. Don't let him play with you. Don't play his game. Subhanallah. Yeah. Other examples here. Yani, a person, there are many desires that a person has that you control. When you are fasting, you might have a desire to eat. Don't you control it? You do. Eating and drinking, right? We do this so casually, morning and night. Favorite foods, and. Overnight, look at the number of changes that we make to ourselves, which highlights that with the right focus, you are able to control your desires. Just as the man who is offered the opportunity to commit zina with a beautiful woman, or a woman who is offered the opportunity to commit zina with a handsome man, they need to control their desires, likewise others. This is what our religion demands of us, so that we would be safe from punishment after we die and rewarded in our graves on the day of judgment and in paradise. Allah is not in need of our worship and is not benefited by anything that we do. Continuing anyway, then, when a person experiences the anxiety, unease, disgust due to the bothersome thought, they're just now repeating some of what we said and re-emphasizing it. The Qareen directs them to do things to reduce or prevent the anxiety. Although in reality, in the future, this behavior will be a reason for them to have increased anxiety. Once that pattern starts to develop, negative, bothersome thought, I feel uneasy. Okay, how do I resolve that? To do something that is not what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged us to do. Okay, might be simple things like not walking on the lines and arranging all the tins to be a certain way, the boxes, everything to be lined up. Even though what's the issue there? But to have everything in a certain symmetry, through to ultimately in acting out certain haram acts to relieve yourself from that anxiety, as though to give in to it. Anyway, that's how that cycle starts. Common types of compulsive behavior, we talked about that. Any cleaning, hand washing, checking that the doors are locked or the gas is off, ordering and arranging, hoarding and keeping hold of things in case you might need them. What if you need it? What if you need it? Right? And buying more in case you need it. You don't need it. You go shopping. What if I need it? Let's get it. It's cheap. Let me get it and stock up. A lot of wasteful stuff. Allah. Then you've got stuff to do with fear of falling into kufr. And that's a massive one. Because for the believer, that is very understandably anxiety provoking. For some people, they think about this issue of kufr again and again and find themselves then in sometimes situations that were not there before they started thinking about them. And they put themselves in a state and situation of panic and fear, and some of them might say precautional testifications of faith over and over again in a way that is not actually healthy for them. And making dhikr is good. But this is not, and if this was something good, what they are doing, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have told us to do it. Subhanallah. And the other one is also common, about fear of being unclean or someone dying, etc. Newborn baby might die, repeatedly checking on them, checking doors are locked and gas is off, etc. Yeah. So the Qareen, he whispers these bad anxiety-provoking matters, encourages the person to do something to relieve themselves And as the problem and pattern persists, the Qareen might then remind them about the unpleasant emotions that they experienced last time. So it builds upon, it might be said, the previous attack, and how they were only relieved by what? By doing that compulsive behavior, rather than what the Prophet ﷺ taught. Like to say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, or to say, آمنت بالله ورسله, for example. Some people, when it persists, they can end up in like a hypersensitized state, in which it becomes even easier for the Qareen to harm them. Some people, like those who've been in battle, many soldiers, they suffer with something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, where they face certain things and they end up in this real extreme, hyper, if you like, fearful state constantly, because they're in battle, it's day and night, they can't relax. Later on, there might be just like a knock and they're just like this. Immediately they're like really tense. It can start to become like a disorder. So for some of them, this issue of was-wās can get really bad. So when they get it and shaitan presses, if you like, metaphorically those buttons, all of those reactions start to occur, and shaitan, it might be said, then would be able to just sit back and the person just takes over, just because they're so used to them being a certain way. And as I said, it might start in your childhood. This example that I gave, that somebody said when they were younger, they got this whisper that that lamppost that you just walked past, if you don't go back and touch it, your mom's going to die. So they're young, they don't understand. That lamppost has got nothing to do with their mom dying. Your mom will die at the time that Allah has eternally willed for her to die. Allah created life and death. And in the norm, okay, you could say to a child, your mom is young, and young people usually don't die. But if they are to die, then this is what Allah has willed to be. For us, it's not this life. We have a hereafter. And that's it. Thereafter, you teach them to recite things. If they can't recite, you could write something, a statement of protection, a ta'weez, and put it around their neck. You can recite for them. And if, for example, you could say, أعيذكم بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهامة وَمِن كُلِّ عَيْنٍ لَامَّةٍ. For example, you could recite statements like this for them, for their protection. And similar statements could be written for their protection. And that's it. Stop at that. Don't dwell upon it. That particular individual, he told me that it went on and on until he said, what if she dies? And then it's going to be like your fault. So he went back and touched it. Now he started. Shaitan got him. Next time round, see, Shaitan will remind him that the only way he was able to relax himself was what? Not saying the isti'adha, because he doesn't know it. Okay? Not learning more religious knowledge. He's not aware of the concept. The only way was to go back and do that compulsive behavior until that pattern stops. Subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to ignore and not engage the was-wās, and to seek the protection of Allah from shaitan, while reminding oneself that everything happens by the will of Allah, the Exalted. Okay? What leads to OCD? Some people are born with this tendency. Okay? This is how it is. Some people are born with this tendency. Sometimes friends, teachers, sadly even someone's religious teachers who are themselves afflicted with problems of was-wās and not knowing how to deal with them, or family members, they can sometimes metaphorically infect others with their OCD. And they can affect them. It's like they pass it on. They start to do certain things. And it gets passed on to their children or their students or their friends. Some people might be born with this tendency, and for some people it develops, and potentially at a young age, due to the effects of the Qareen. And maybe some people, if there was no such thing as Qareen, they might have suffered with something similar, with a bit of anxiety and worrying about certain things. The Qareen just makes all of that worse. Some life events, such as having been abused or neglected, sometimes on the back of childbirth or bereavement. These are really more like starting points. This, for me, it's shaitan takes advantage of things that happened to a person at one point in their life. In fact, as it says, because shaitan takes advantage of the situation. Likewise, lack of sleep and sometimes stimulants like caffeine. They can help the Qareen with the anxiety-provoking whispers. Most people with OCD realize that such compulsive behavior that results is irrational. It doesn't make sense. But they feel they cannot stop acting on it, and feel they need to do it just in case. What if, that is. Because if they don't, then something bad might happen. Shaitan goes on and on with that. Once a person develops this disorder, it's ultimately a health condition, similar to other illnesses like asthma and diabetes. It's a mental health condition. And Allah knows best about the pathophysiology, which means like the disease mechanism, if you like. Allah knows best. I believe personally that many mental illnesses, they occur due to chemical imbalances that result in the brain, and dysfunctional, not functioning in the correct way, dysfunctional neuronal pathways, certain like nervous pathways, actual nerve tracts that develop due to repeated, if you like, stresses, what I might consider as repeated assaults on our way of thinking. Repeated assaults on our way of thinking by our environment. Somebody might be sexually or physically abused in their childhood. Sometimes the Qareen is the one who has been bombarding them. Sometimes a mixture of things, until things start to change. And then they manifest in whatever way they manifest. Many, I'm not saying all. And I base that upon there are any first-hand experience and experience of others. Those who are suffering with certain, not OCD, but other types of mental illnesses, how effective is the treatment that resets the balance, the imbalance that has occurred. Many, many, many people, I saw them benefit from it. And with my eyes, many, many, many people. And certain others where, and even they did it from animals to others, where they cut certain nerve tracts that had become overdeveloped with fear, etc., fearful stimulants, if you like, or fear, anxiety provoking things, and how that changed the behavior, etc. Anyway, that's another topic. People might be reluctant to seek help because they feel ashamed or embarrassed, but leaving things without seeking help often leads to a worsening of the situation and can make treatment more challenging in the future. The main treatments of OCD is through knowledge, and ultimately Was-Wās is through knowledge and using certain principles of a therapy, a psychological, if you like, therapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which helps a person understand and face their fears and obsessive thoughts without putting them right through compulsions. In Western medicine, they also try tablets, medicines, but these currently, what's available is not as effective as knowledge and talking about it. Although medicines can help associated underlying anxiety and depression, many times these things go hand in hand. The CBT is usually effective very quickly. Medicines, they take a lot longer to help, if at all. And even if they help with anxiety and depression, they can take months, although in that regard, they often do help. They often do help within 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, 3 months, like that. But CBT can work very quickly. And it's interesting to note that some psychologists, they teach people to recognize that some things that they obsess about could actually happen. But they're trying to get absolute certainty that they won't is impossible. That's in essence a religious principle. Whatever Allah has willed to be shall be. It might happen. This thing might happen. You might die upon kufr. Your child might die. That what if it might actually occur? Whatever Allah has willed to be shall be. You cannot get a certainty that it won't occur. And feeling about it, going like this, I might die upon kufr, I might die upon kufr. Let me say the shahadatain again and again and again and again. This is not the fear that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam directed us to have a good ending. In the concluding lesson, the next couple of lessons, we're going to get there. We're going to review this in more detail. Getting the good ending. And getting relief further from this issue of Was-Wās. The key thing here is that one does not live their life according to hypothetical, imaginary, theoretical, hypothetical thoughts and playing the what-if game of the Qareen. Rather, one goes according to the reality, busies themselves with what is most beneficial. Not just beneficial. Shaitan might say to you, this is going to be something beneficial. Ask yourself, is it the most beneficial thing? Do I really need to do it? If not, then leave it. Even if it is beneficial. Let me leave it. Let me try to do what is most beneficial. Because sometimes Shaitan will use that with you as well. This is something beneficial. But is it the most beneficial thing you can do? Because this is a game that he might use to engage you. And the other one goes to the reality, as I said, with the reality. Busies themselves with what is most beneficial. And keeps reminding oneself, whatever Allah has eternally willed to be, shall be. This is the last slide for today. I'll spend a bit more time on it, but just give me another 5 minutes, inshallah. At least for now. So to wrap up today's lesson. The creedal destruction of the Qareen. Imam Ahmad narrated, actually, was one of the smallest, well, another slide after this. Imam Ahmad in his Musnad and others narrated from the root of Ibn ad-Daylami in a Sahih narration that he said, this follower of the Sahaba, okay, he said, I came to Ubay ibn Ka'ab. Who is Ubay? One of the greatest among the companions, known as having the highest status in reciting the Quran. He came to Ubay and he said, I said, O Abul Munzir, something has occurred to me in my mind with reference to the issue of qadr, destiny. Something that's bothering me. So talk to me about it. Perhaps Allah will benefit me by your speech. Ubay radiyallahu an, he said, Inna Allah law addaba ahla samawatihi wa ahla ardi la'addabahum wa huwa ghayru zalimin lahum wa law rahimahum kanat rahmatuhu khayran lahum min a'malihim ولو أنفقت مثل أحد ذهبا في سبيل الله ما قبله الله منك حتى تؤمن بالقدر وتعلم أن ما أصابك لم يكن ليخطئك وما أخطأك لم يكن ليصيبك وَلَوْ مِتَّ عَلَى غَيْرِ هَذَا لَدَخَلْتَ النَّارِ. This means, he said to him, indeed, Allah, had He tortured the people of His skies and His earth, He would have tortured them without Him being unjust to them. And had He been merciful to them instead of punishing them, then His mercy would be better for them than their good deeds. I.e., the good deeds do not obligate Allah to reward people, but rather Allah rewards by His mercy. And had you given in charity the likes of Mount Uhud in gold for the sake of Allah, Allah would not accept it from you until you believe in the issue of destiny. Everything that occurs, good or bad, it is by Allah having destined it in accordance, that is, with the eternal will of Allah. And know that whatever hit you would not have missed you, and whatever missed you was not going to hit you. And if you die on other than this, you will enter hellfire. Ibn ad-Daylami then said, I then went to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu an, and he told me something similar to the aforementioned. He then said, I went to Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. These are all massive, like great companions, amongst the best of all the Sahaba. Huge ranks. Hudhayfa radiyallahu an said, I went to him and he told me something similar to the aforementioned. He then said, I went to Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu an, and he told me something similar to the aforementioned, but from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, he said, and this is what the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught me. This is the belief with which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam came with. Ibn Asakir, he mentioned in his Aqidah, a leaf does not fall except that God, Allah, knows about it. There is no grain in the darkness of the earth or anything which is moist or dry, except that it is documented in a clear book, i.e. the preserved tablet in Allahul Mahfuz. God's knowledge encompasses everything. God knows the count and the state of all things. Having the correct belief and referring back to it again and again, this is a major weapon in fighting shaitan and protecting yourself from his harm. And this is why the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught his daughters, as was narrated by Abu Dawood in his Sunan, Ahmad in his Musnad, Ibn Hibban in his Sahih, among others, that he would teach them to say this statement again and again. ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن. Whatever Allah has eternally willed to be shall be, and whatever Allah did not eternally will to be, it will not be. Whatever is due to hit you, it will never miss you, and what is due to miss you, it will never hit you. Rely upon Allah, the Exalted, and Allah knows best. Barakallahu fikum. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Allahumma aghfir lil mu'minina wal mu'minat al-ahya'i minhum wal amwat. O Allah, forgive us, guide us and protect us. O Allah, grant us the correct knowledge and understanding of the rules of the religion. O Allah, accept our attendance in this gathering this evening and give us similar reward to all of our teachers back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. O Allah, protect us from the sins of the heart and make us among those who fulfill the obligations of the heart. Ya Rabb, make us among your pious, obedient slaves. O Allah, relieve the Muslims in whatever distress they are in throughout the world at the hands of unjust oppressors. Ya Rab, in Palestine, in Kashmir, in Myanmar, and in other parts of the world. Ya Rab, unite the Muslims upon the truth. O Allah, make us people who support one another in doing that which is good and not in cooperating in that which is evil, playing into the hands of shaitan and the enemies of Islam. O Allah, end our lives successfully. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah, people have been mentioning, make dua for Palestine. And it is sad. I was emotionally affected by it. I would estimate, as with all Muslims who care for their fellow Muslims. And that's something good to have that care. But the calamity that hit us wasn't just 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. And it didn't start with Palestine. Right? It goes before that. Among the calamities that befell us were the deaths of the scholars. More and more of them dying, and as a result of that, people then using the Muslims, the masses that we are, for their own personal gains. People who seek power, money and fame, relied upon the lack of knowledge and the lack of scholars, and those who are brave to speak up and take certain stances to cause a lot of harm. And this issue started centuries ago, not just now. These are just some things that we're witnessing now are just a manifestation of these calamities that started to befall us. And if you take out of them, it's to go back to the knowledge and to implement it. Okay? When people are like that, their situation is very different. The way that they stand and deal with their calamities. Right now, there are many Muslim countries that have got armies and that could do certain things to defend those who are being treated in an unjust way, whoever they might be. They could do certain things, even to protect some non-Muslims from being treated unjustly. But sometimes they don't have the heart that you need and the heart that the people of the past had. And there's more to be said by that. I don't want others to misunderstand my comments. Allah knows best. Barakallahu feekum.